If you're feeling down right now, if you're struggling with imposter syndrome, if you're really intimidated by the next thing that comes up, maybe it's your next job interview, maybe it's a university interview, maybe you're moving countries and change is just happening to your life right now inevitably and it's scaring you, well, that's okay. Because today's episode with Brianna Sylver helps leaders navigate exactly what you're going through, that uncertainty, with the clarity and the confidence that you need. But just before we begin, can I ask you a favor? Can you please double check that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and follow the show and rate this episode 5 stars so we can keep bringing amazing guests, because my guest list is only getting better and bigger.
Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the SMARTA Podcast.
With that being said, today's episode will give you clarity on these top 3 things. You're going to learn that your future is ambiguous. It's okay if you don't know what's going to happen next year, because the truth is you can only control half of it, and the other, well, that's just the unknown. The second is that going through change is difficult, but that's okay, because if you surround yourself with the right people and find the right support and habits to release that energy that can be very easily built up, that's perfect. And the third thing is that you have to be comfortable with opening yourself up to your introspective self. Brianna is the founder and president of Sylver Consulting, which is an international innovation strategy firm that she launched back in 2003 and grew from a solo practice into a global organization. As an innovation strategist, educator, and globally recognized speaker, Brianna is widely known as an innovation leader working at the right intersection of strategy, design, and market insight to help organizations identify, create, and execute their visions for growth. What truly sets Brianna apart is her superpower, clarity. She has a rare ability to cut through indecision, missteps, and noise, bringing purpose-driven focus to complex growth challenges. By eliminating those unnecessary steps and inefficiencies, she helps teams create clear pathways forward, delivering swift, measurable impact on the business goals that really matter most. Beyond her client work, Brianna is a sought-after thought leader and educator in innovation, design, strategy, and human-centered problem solving. She has been recognized by organizations such as the Product Development and Management Association, HSM Management in Brazil, and the Qualitative Research Consults Association. She serves on the board of overseas at the IIT Institute of Design. Without further ado, here's the full conversation. Brianna Sylver, are you ready to get smarter?
I sure am. Can't wait.
I can't wait to begin with you and your journey, because you spent more than 20 years leading innovation through uncertainty and even wrote a book on that. So if you can talk directly with the person listening right now, in terms of people that might feel uncertain or unsure about their future, what would be the 3 most important takeaways you tell them?
Yeah, so this is a great question to kick us off here, right? So in terms of thinking about the future, which of course, despite how much we try to control it or think that it's predictable, it never is.
It's not.
That's all a myth. And so the first thing is, just notice that, know that, stop trying to control it, to know that, you can't create change. It kind of finds you, and you can only create the conditions through which you kind of ride through that change. There's parts of it that you can control. There's parts that you can't. Basically focus where you can control and, as much as possible, surrender and let go of all that you cannot, right? So that's the first thing. The second is that, change is difficult. It goes through it gracefully. There's certainly people who maybe travel the change curve with a tiny bit more grace than others, but nobody really does it well, right? And so you can really, it's going to be uncomfortable, and just, again, know that and realize that you can lead yourself through that discomfort. And that is where you want to be versus trying to avoid it. And then the third point is just, get comfortable with being open and introspective with yourself. I mean, I think that's a key piece of this is when you are at the point of feeling challenged, discomfortable or uncomfortable, really just kind of checking in with yourself and saying, why do I really feel this way? And really going into some inquiry. And when you can get introspective, that's really where you find the moments of growth. And the reality is that some of the best moments of growth come through the valleys. So you kind of got to go through the suck and the hard to get to the good.
I love, I can't get over the book trailer that I watched just before hopping on today's call. And I'm really excited that you talked to me about knowing that your future can be out of your control, and in some ways it can be in your control. Because if you're leading innovation, in order to be good at being a leader, you can't manage the process. You have to first manage your emotions. And that ties a lot into the idea of self-leadership, which all starts with clarity to know where you're coming from, especially as we've entered the new year. It's already 2026. And so in order to have a great year standing, whether you're a personal brand or whether you're an employee or whether you're leading a team of multiple people, you have to lead it with intentionality and know where you're coming from. I want to talk to you about clarity because you describe it as your superpower. Looking back on your journey, was clarity something that you discovered right away, or was it something that emerged through those moments of confusion, doubt, and freefall?
Yeah, so this is also a really great question because so I kind of have a fundamental belief that, we're all here for a purpose. We all have gifts that have been granted to us for a purpose, right? And so those are what I call our superpowers or our core value offer, as I refer to it in the book. And so, to ask the question, did I always know that clarity was my gift? No, I did not know that it was my gift. Was it always my gift? Yeah, I do actually think it has always been my gift,
Yeah.
but I didn't claim that gift until like 9 years ago. And so what got to the claiming of that gift actually was a free fall moment. Ironically, or maybe not so ironically because we're connected, one of your most recent guests actually was a big piece of me finding that moment of clarity, Bob Berg,
Really?
when you did The Go-Giver.
Bob Berg, no way.
Yeah, that is like one of my all-time favorite books. He has been super influential into kind of who I am standing here today. Although he probably does not even, begin to understand how much, right? So let me tell you the story. So
Yeah, go
how
for it.
we got here is this is about 9 years ago, I guess. And so maybe going back 10 years ago. But, I had a young child. I own a business, have employees, work in innovation all over the globe. And so
You've done
have a
a
lot
little
going
bit of
on, of
everything.
course, and married, wife, all these other roles, right? As a young, relatively young professional at that point in time and, juggling all these roles, I was not doing it well. I,
You're just
I
kidding how many you can.
exactly. I felt like I was failing at every corner in a lot of ways. And so I kind of hit a low moment. It was a moment where basically, my business shrunk for like back 50% in a given year, which was like huge. And this was after we had made like this huge investment in building a building for our company. And so like major cash is going out, not as much cash is coming back in. It was definitely it was a big low moment. And I had to kind of get through that moment by going inwards. So going back to that, top thing to take away, that introspection, right?
Yeah.
And I needed to start doing some inner work. And so one of the pieces of inner work was this aspect of what is my core value offer? Like, what am I really brought here to do? And so through an exercise that I speak about in the book, it basically clarity came to be. And I was like, that totally makes sense because now I could look back across all of my life and be like, yep, that moment, that moment, that. And so that like level of evidence was like, yes, that is one of my superpowers, right? A superpower that makes me stand tall, confident, stand in front of Fortune 50 leaders and like really help them to chart their future and their course, right? Now, where Bob comes back into the story here is in that same period of time, I had been at like a networking event and somebody had said, no, just talking to me like, have you ever read the book, The Go-Giver? And I was like, no, and he told me about it. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to check that out. And of course, put it on my, reading list, the one
Yeah.
that you hardly ever pick any books, right?
But this case was different.
Well, it wasn't actually. So then the next Monday, so this is like on a Thursday,
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
Monday morning, one of my teammates comes into the office and she hands me the Go-Giver book. She was not part of this conversation. And she was like, I was at a yard sale this past weekend, and this woman had like 7 or 8 copies of The Go-Giver. And of course, that caused me to ask questions. And as she's telling me about this book, I was like, oh, that's how Brianna leads her life. I need to get her this book. So then I was like, okay, universe, God, I got you. Like, I need to read this book. And so then I like legitly sat down and read the book. And another big piece of that was this notion of like, I had been leading my life with such giving energy. But then in the nuance of, basically all of these roles and with a young child at home, I had stopped living with such, sort of abundant giving spirit. And so it was like basically, being clobbered over the head to be like, you need to go back to the basics here. Right. And so I did. And between the clarity and then this notion of like, okay, I need to get back into this giving spirit and just give freely of myself to activate the abundant energy backwards. Like within a month or two, my business started to turn around with that level of clarity and that level of, sort of giving spirit, which are, 2 key pieces of now leading through freefall.
Wow. And you just saw the signs. The Go-Giver appeared everywhere in your life and you had to read it. It's really interesting. And I really appreciate that you share all of your story with me because I think it's something a lot of people find relatable. Everyone encounters those rough moments along their life. And it's, to bring you back to my world as a teenager, I find a lot of my circle has this notion of we need to get to the mountain peak as fast as possible. And you sort of forget to enjoy the climb and the summit on the way there. So I think a question that I found myself that could be really useful is what's the first step for people that don't see books coming along their way? What would you say really helped you in finding that clarity?
Yeah, so I really think, at least what I've had to learn in my career, and like I think, definitely that moment that I just told you about was sort of like a turning point for me. Because I was definitely living towards that, okay, let's just keep reaching,
Yeah.
right?
And it was
And I wasn't taking a lot of time to say, is this what I really want? Right. So, like, from an outward perspective, I looked super successful. And, from a financial standpoint and all that, it was, but I was exhausted and I wasn't happy, right? And so that moment really sort of was a turning point for me. And so it goes back to that point of introspection. Like, I think it's really important for people to check in with themselves frequently, to
just
say,
pause and reflect.
yeah, just like, how am I feeling about where this is going, right? Your life can lead you, or you can choose to lead your life. And if you are not choosing to intentionally lead your life, it will lead you, right? Because you'll end up falling into the shoulds instead of the what you want to do. You'll find yourself in comparison of, should I be at this stage, at this age? Well, oh, this is what this friend is doing. Why am I not there? That type of stuff, right? And all of that is just serves to like tear you down and not really support you to stand tall. And going back to the gifts, I mean, if you know what your gift is, then you know where you need to be channeling your energy, you know?
Can I say, I'm smiling my way through this, and it's because I find that actually reflecting and pausing help my life so much. I think it's so powerful to see that actually what accomplishments are and to consistently come back to review your goals can be because usually they can be out of tune. And now I think this is the perfect moment to introduce your book, Leading Through Freefall, How Innovators Turn Turbulence into Trust. Because you explain that those free fall moments aren't just failures, they're part of that innovation process. So I want to ask you now, Brianna, how do you think young people can reframe that uncertainty as a signal for growth rather than just living their lives as something that they're doing wrong?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we have to just realize that turbulence is going to happen. Like,
It's inevitable.
it's inevitable, right? And so the question is that so the turbulence is inevitable, but the suffering is optional. It's about how you
Yeah.
choose to see it, right? So there's a couple reframes that are required in the process. So the first is just sort of stop believing the myth of the smooth process. Like, it's not going to be smooth. Things
It's
are going
not
to go
linear.
haywire. And, they're meant to, right? Like, but the reality is that when things don't go the way that we plan, oftentimes we can internalize that as we did something wrong. Right. And now it becomes about you, or it becomes about the other people who are part of the situation. And it becomes more of a finger pointing game versus, just, kind of like realizing, okay, plan didn't go as planned, as they generally do not. What do we do and how do we pivot, right? And so you have to get into this position where you're starting to embrace every roadblock or resistance that you're receiving as a gift. And a good big piece of this is like reframing that to say, instead of like, why is this happening to me? Asking, why is this happening for me? Which is, it's easy to say that right now. It's much harder to do when you're in the midst of it, right? Where you're like, why is this happening for me? Right. But, the reality is that there's a lesson in everything. And
Yes.
sometimes we see the lesson immediately. Other
Mm.
times we don't. So like, for instance, knowing that you now are a lover of tracking, as I am. The
Yes,
things that I did, I don't necessarily do it super religiously now, but I did it for a while just to try to support this reframing, or sort of create the muscle for the reframing. Is anytime I got into those moments where I'd be like, why is this happening to me? Right? Like, why did this employee leave? Or why did this client say this thing, or whatever it might be, right?
Mm.
I would create a spreadsheet and I'd put the thing,
Okay.
and then I'd, put whatever my initial thoughts or reactions, feelings were to that in the next column. And then I'd have 3 columns after it. So I'd come back and look at it in a week and say, how do I see that now? Like, what is the purpose of that situation now? And then I'd come back in a month, and then I'd come back in 3 or 6 months. And it was really fascinating to see very, very quickly, like, how something that can be
Different.
perceived as a real low moment, really can be either just a sort of a non-moment, a month or 3 months later. It's like, oh, yeah, that really was just kind of a bump, not really a big deal, right? To then, something that actually like got you on a wholly new path that was a really meaningful path for you, right? And so like, but that's a big piece of it, is just like, how do you reframe those roadblocks as gifts and see them as opportunities to, go deeper within yourself, go deeper with the people that are around you. They really do provide opportunities for growth and connection, all of the valley points. It's just a matter of how do you choose to embrace them or not.
It's easy to get lost with all of the noise in just how much you're accomplishing and how fast you're growing when you compare yourself to others that are already at the success level that you are aiming for. And this comparison can get a lot of to us. So I wanted to ask you, what mistake do you see in young professionals that they make when they hit that resistance or self-doubt for the very first time?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake is people retreat and shrink back.
Mm.
It's
They
like,
just
that
crowd.
feeling of shame, right? Like, oh, I'm not here. I didn't get this done. I'm not enough. So it's kind of like, why
Imposter
bother?
syndrome.
Like, so, they retreat, generally, like, particularly if it's like a resistance, like somebody's like, you did something wrong. Like, how could you think about this? Right. Then it's like, oh gosh, what did I do wrong? Right. And then if it's more of like, like a comparison, or like, feeling I didn't get this done, or I didn't do this, like, then it becomes like more shrinking away, right, with shame. And I think the reality is that those emotions and those cues, they really are signals. They're cues to kind of lean in with curiosity and say, okay, yeah, I didn't do that. I'm feeling this, this self-doubt, or feeling this shame, or feeling not enough, whatever you want to put as the emotion underneath it. but leaning into that to say, why do I really feel that way? Right. So, like, and what's really going on to create that. And so there's lots of different ways that people can kind of do this. So, like, for instance, let's just think about like if you were in a workplace, for instance, and you shared an idea, right? And people are like, oh, Sonia,
Thank
we're not
you.
going to do that. Thanks. Like if they really just sort of kind of dismissed it like that, you probably would be like, "Whoa, I guess I'm not. I haven't been here long enough. I don't, maybe I should just keep my mouth shut. Maybe I shouldn't really, speak out." Right? You might shrink back and sort of retreat in that situation.
Mhm.
And the reality is probably that dismissing of your idea has nothing to do with you. But if you let it fester, more than likely, if you're like me, you're going to make it about you, right? And
Yeah.
the rumination is going to happen and it's not going to be really, really productive. But like if you lean in and you say, now, of course, this takes some bravery and courage. But if you lean in and you say, okay, like I hear you, idea is maybe not the best idea for right now. But, what do you like about the idea? Right. And then, kind of get a sense of what are they like. And then what is it about the idea that feels not right for this moment? Or what about the idea do you not like type of thing? And the reality is that once they start to respond to that, you'll realize it's not about you.
Mhm.
You'll probably learn something about, the situation, the context, the company, whatever the context of the situation is that you didn't know. And you'll probably be able to then activate other brainstorming energy to then say, well, what if we did this instead? Right. And so you would turn this thing that could easily, sort of sit within your own heart and mind as like something that Sonia can't do and turn it into, the brilliant Sonia that everybody knows, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, this is precisely why we have this girl, right? Like she leans in with curiosity and she helped us to move from this to that, right? But oftentimes, we take these moments as hits to our own personal ego instead of just realizing it's just a situation. And how do you lean into the situation with curiosity to learn more and then move forward?
I want to use that example of being in the room when a presentation is happening and everyone turns to the people at the table. What should we do now? What any ideas do you have? And it's that brainstorming time where it's so easy to find all of the people that always want to share their ideas, even if they're not great. And the leader in the room might adapt that, I guess, behavior or attitude. Thank you so much of being dismissive. And then you could come up with a really good idea that is exactly what was needed. But just because it was after that person that spoke up, just because they wanted to bring their attention onto themselves, you could get discarded as well. But that doesn't mean your idea is bad. And I found that talking with a couple of people in the work industry that have been building businesses and founders, that actually, if you just sit back and relax after what you said and it was dismissed, falling into what your advice was, to just see how much you've spoken to the person sitting next beside you and how much they spoke in terms of you, because it's very easy, as you said, to just spiral down, be shy and not want to speak up again. But actually your voice and your opinion matters just as much as the person next to you. So if they've just been talking a lot of nonsense, really, to just bring their attention because maybe they're new and they want to get noticed in the business, whereas you've been a valued member for a couple of years, then it's not your sign to shy or bow down. It's your sign to unlearn the silence and speak up, knowing the context, of course.
Mhm.
That leads me to emotions and the importance of human emotions, and particularly resistance, as to why they play such a big role in innovation and change. What's
Mhm.
your take on that? Why do you think they play such a big role in?
Yeah. So one of the things that was probably the biggest surprise for me as I was writing Leading Through Freefall was recognizing that because I had never put it into words until I sat down to write the book, right? Like that when people are posed with change, they go through a grief curve. And so the very first step on that grief curve is resistance. And then, it's despair and bargaining and depression until they get to a point of acceptance. Now, depending upon the level of change that people are going through, they're going to travel that change curve at different rates. And then, just individuals in general have, more tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty than others, right? And so they will travel that change curve at different rates as well. But when we are younger in our careers, and I don't even think that that's true. I think pretty much because what I have realized after I've published this book is that it doesn't matter what tenure you are in an organization, just starting out or basically been in the profession for 30, 40 years, you find value in this book, right? And so, basically, if you are not hitting that resistance up front, if you're trying to be a leader of change, like that is part of your job, like, and you're not hitting resistance, you need to ask yourself whether you're pushing, if you're going big enough, basically, and maybe you're just going too small. But for somebody who maybe is not necessarily calling themselves a change maker, but maybe, just a young professional starting out in a career, they're really excited about a project that they've put together. They take it to their boss and the boss is like, well, that's great, but yeah, maybe not so much right now, right? And they get some resistance, right? Like just recognizing too that, resistance is the first step on that change curve. And so that's where kind of leaning in with that curiosity is important, because it's like, is it because it's really just a bad idea for some reason? Okay, it could be, right? And so you lean in with those questions of, okay, what did you like? What do you not like? So that we can kind of find a path forward. It could also just be that they have to travel the change curve related to something. And so the reality is like, particularly if your job is in change making in some capacity, right? Like people will always say, we want change. And so everybody wants the outcome of the transformation, but they don't really want to travel the change curve to get there, right? Because that's uncomfortable. And it's full of that anxiety and it's full of the uncertainty and all the other jazz that we've already talked about, right? So, so they don't want necessarily that. So I think the biggest thing for people to know going into that is that as you're doing any project, I don't really care like what the level of magnitude is, but as you're doing any project, there's the process of the project, which we all feel super comfortable talking about and generally, well versed in, like that's what you get trained in is the process.
Mm-hmm.
But then underneath the process is all of the energy and emotion underneath that process.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that none of us ever talk about. And then basically, oftentimes, you don't even want to acknowledge it. Like, even if you have awareness of the fact that it's there, you want to push through it or avoid it, or you just kind of operate as though it's just not even there. Like, it's kind of like it's not there at all. Yet, the reality is that is the work, is leading the emotional energy of humans through change and helping to sort of tame the anxieties along the way, because that is what ultimately supports you to get impact. Like you can have a lot of agreement, but if people aren't feeling that change in their heart and they don't really want it, you're not going to get the action towards the agreed upon actions. If they are truly connected to it in the heart, then not only will the action happen, but it will oftentimes happen faster than what you could imagine. And the impact will be much, much greater than you could ever possibly imagine.
I know your book was meant for leaders, but I can so easily see how the grief curve and everything you've been talking to me about so far can be easily translated to teenagers or young early career professionals that are just starting out their first job, or students that are moving from high school to university and have to deal with new professors, people they don't get along with, people that they maybe can't work with at all because they refuse or reject that. And it's all about having that greater emotional intelligence to understand why they might be, because more often than not, it's always not personal to you. It's always about them. And I just wanted to make that connection because even though I, for example, have no experience in the corporate world, sitting, my way through 9-to-5 job for a couple of years, I can very easily see how this can translate to your work life, to your relationships, to school environment. And it's so true.
It is true. And, I've actually had a number of people say that to me about the book. They're like, I picked it up for this reason, but I've gained all these other things from it too. I mean, frankly, I use a lot of the tools that are spoke about in the book in my own personal life. I use them with my family, even like thinking, all right, what do we want on a next vacation? But it's true. And it all comes down to the fact that there's always a second story happening. There's the story that we see, right? And that we're experiencing. And then there's, the story below the story. And the reality is there's probably multiple stories below the story because it depends on how many people are in that story, right? So every person engaged in the story is going to have their own emotional experience underneath that. And that's informed by whatever's happening for them individually. It's informed by all of their past experiences, their lived experiences informing that. And so all of that is coming together to impact how they are seeing and or behaving within the story that everybody's seeing, right? And so if you're only operating as though it's the story that you're seeing through your eyes, you're missing 90% of where the value of the connection can really be. And so that's where like all of the tools in the book speak to how do you unlock that other 90% of connection and value, with whatever's going on in the moment.
Absolutely. It, you just reminded me to the analogy that every single human is like an onion. You peel back layers and you can get intimidated that, you can have a job interview coming up for the very first time in your life. And you look to the admissions officer if you're applying to university or to the person hiring you or to your boss. And you can get very easily intimidated if you forget that they're human too at the end of the day. And so through this, I want to switch over to habits and mindset and ask you, Brianna, how can young people prepare emotionally? What habits can get them through to just not technically change, but look at their life and really change as a whole?
Yeah, so one of the key metaphors that I use in the book, which is it's funny how much it's sort of taken root with people because it's like maybe mentioned 2 or 3 times. When people come back to me, they're like, the Care Bear of love. Because I use this imagery of like be a Care Bear of love. And so that's one of the things that I do as I go into situations, particularly those ones that you're mentioning that you kind of like can get in your head about it, get a little intimidated in the situation, and just be like, okay, I am going to be in this situation, visualizing myself as a Care Bear projecting love from my belly, right? Sounds so dumb and stupid. But the reality is that when you embody that type of energy, at least for what it does for me mentally, is it takes me from this space of feeling like judgment either about myself or the situation that I'm about ready to jump into, to being one that's more about servant and sort of being supportive and like compassionate and kind of leading with that type of energy, right? So it just is a good like visual like talisman for me to kind of flip, right? So that's one of them. Another piece is just like, really be the question asker. So when you find yourself really wanting to potentially retreat or shrink away, as we were talking about before, really resisting that urge actively and intentionally and leaning in to ask more questions. And so that could just be like, asking legit questions, like I mentioned before. It could be, okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that, right? Like, tell me more, like, why that is, or, why do we do this, or, those types of things. And I think, especially when you're a younger professional, like, you can feel intimidated asking those questions because you're like, oh, there's a good reason why this is done. People have been doing this for 20 years before I got here. And the reality is sometimes that there isn't a good reason, or there was a good reason 20 years ago, but there is not a good reason now, right? And so, there's value in asking the why, but really leaning in and not dismissing yourself, because I think a lot of times, particularly when I was younger, I dismissed myself a lot.
Mm.
Nobody else was having to dismiss me. I was doing a fine job on my, right? Like, and so, really, realizing that you have something good to offer. And then the other thing is just like, consistently sort of checking in on your own vitality too. Like the situations in which we thrive the most, we basically have, a level of autonomy, competence, and connectedness. So, really intentionally asking yourself, do you feel like you have autonomy in the way that you're operating? Or do you feel like there's levels of micromanagement, for instance? And then how do you sort of address that with a difficult conversation potentially? Or do you feel connected and supported in the work that you're doing? Again, if the answer is no, what changes need to be made to better support that, right? And then competence, like, do you actually feel like you got the skills to do the job? And if you don't, well, okay, what do you need to do that, right? So it's like, it's sort of checking in on that so that you can, as much as possible, take control of supporting yourself to have a good experience. Sometimes that's about you going and getting those skills or sort of taking actions. Sometimes it's about having difficult conversations. But I find for myself, when I can start to parse feelings versus sort of just like allowing the feeling to overwhelm me, that's
Mm.
when I can get into the space of action of like, okay, if this is how I'm feeling, I'm not feeling good. So why am I not feeling good? And then what do I need to change to get to a better space, and then, usually they're not huge things. They're little tiny things that make big impact,
Yeah.
much like you're pausing for an hour, if it even takes you that long, to like celebrate what you did for a quarter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's so simple and it can very easily take just under 5-10 minutes if you really have everything clear in your head. And I want to channel in that shift into getting better as in terms to, teenagers feeling stuck, unsure, maybe even afraid to make the wrong move. Very easily we can like lean into our imposter syndrome. So I want to ask you, Brianna, what's one small action that they can take this week to regain that momentum, to get back on track?
Yeah. So a big thing is defining your rocks. One of the things that I thought about as you were sharing kind of how you track, how you were celebrating your successes. One change that I made for myself about a year ago, which has been game changing for me, is I have 4 key goals, a mix of personal and professional. And so every day I create my to-do list around those 4 key goals and then a miscellaneous group. And so I journal against that to say, okay, what do I need to do today? What actions do I need to do today to do the X, right? And then, whatever 2, 3, 4, 5 things come out, right? And then I do it for the second goal, third, fourth. And then it's like, okay, beyond these goals, what else do I need to put attention to today? And then I go back and I highlight the most important thing in each of those lists because I'm a perpetual ander and I always like, I'll do this and this and this and this and like have a, to-do
Yeah.
list that's 30 hours for, a 24-hour day.
Yeah.
And so, I'll highlight the thing that's the most important and then I order the rest of the day around those most important items. Now, I usually get more than those most important items done, but it keeps focus. And so, that keeps me focused and making sure that I'm making traction against all of my goals and not getting sidetracked with, like, for instance, only doing client work, right? And it keeps me grounded because then, as the day goes on and things move and it's like, okay, where do I go? Okay, just go to the highlighted things. Okay, what can I, start to make traction on and, the 20 minutes I've got before the next meeting or whatever it might be. So, that would be like one of the things that I would really suggest to just like stay focused and to stay grounded in that focus is to
Mhm.
be, again, really intentional about how are you operating. And this particular hack has really helped me. It felt like it really helped to reduce the level of anxiety that I had
Mm.
because it was kind of like, oh, but I didn't get this done and I didn't get this done. And, it's not perfect every day, but, it's definitely a lot better than it was a year ago.
And it's all ever growing and progressing into something better. And Actually, there's so many people that I'm shocked about that don't have a to-do list when it comes outside of work about their personal goals, their personal tasks. And just everything that you've said, if we even work backwards, back to the point of you were telling me you've got 4 different sets of goals. You've got personal and professional. Many people don't have that. And I think it's amazing if the person listening right now can just pause and think maybe if they're doing those on those levels, or if they're just focusing themselves on being the best employee of the month. Because very often you've talked to me about change, something really unexpected can happen, and God forbid you might lose that job, and all of a sudden all of the attention goes to your internal self, and you might feel unhappy, or you might feel like you've been really strong at your job but you don't know what your values are, what you stand for. I think this is truly the best place to like shift into the direction of the SMARTA podcast traditions. So, Brianna Sylver, I've got 4 questions for you. Why don't we start with the challenge?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so the challenge I've got prepared for you is a 60-second challenge in terms of you pitching the book Leading Through Freefall to the person listening right now. Why should they read it?
Okay, why should they read Leading Through Freefall? So, Leading Through Freefall is going to give you 17 tools and frameworks that really help you to manage your energy as you grow as a leader. And it's going to help you to see what is happening underneath the projects and the situations that are causing you a sense of discomfort and turbulence. And most importantly, it's going to give you the actions to take to get to a better place that's going to result in more impact. And that includes, basically whatever the outcome that you're trying to achieve in the work that you're doing, as well as you just feeling happier while you do it.
And that was under 30 seconds. So
How about that?
amazing. The second question is where I asked the last guest to leave a question for the next one. And so in this scenario, Musanda Veronica left over this question for you. As you've progressed in your career, have you struggled with winner's guilt, that inner tension between being proud of your successes and feeling like you shouldn't outgrow others?
Yes, I have definitely felt this way. So what I would suggest as people go through this, because I think it's very common. Yeah, everybody's going to go through this. But I think one of the things that has helped me to climb out of that situation is to really be very conscious about who you are surrounding yourself with. So, finding and surrounding yourself with people who are cheerleaders for you, and that, it can be in a lot of different ways. When they are giving you advice, that advice is coming because they believe that that is best for you in that moment, not because they are modulating their advice according to whatever their situation would be.
I cannot agree more, because what I found most intriguing was when I was having those highs and successes and accomplishments, I found myself not having almost anyone to cheer me on, to encourage me, and to congratulate me. So it's very easy to find those people that are energy drainers and that are there for you when you're low, but very hard to be energy givers and be there for you when you're truly living the best life. And there was this quote about why mentors are so important in your life. And it was because they're your biggest fan and your harshest critic at the same time.
Yeah,
So it's all about the balance.
it is about the balance. Yeah. And I 100% agree with what you're saying. Actually think this is harder for women than it is for men, about finding other women who
That leads you.
are really willing to prop you up. And so when you find them, latch onto them and hold on to them.
Never let them go.
Exactly.
And my third question is going to take you all the way back in time to when you were my age. So if you could go back to when you were 17, Brianna, what would be one piece of advice about creating a successful career that you wish you could tell yourself to lead you on to present moment?
Yeah, so I would tell myself that you're not defined by what you lack, but you are defined by the unique light that you shine. And so it goes all the way back to that superpower conversation, right? Where generally speaking, your superpower, it's not a grade, it's not a degree, it's not a job title. It's the way in which you operate in the world and the light that you shine to others, through you and to others as a result of that. And so, it's about really honing into that. And so that, when you feel like you're not enough, it's just stop judging yourself by a metric that's not even yours to own, because that's not why you're called to be here right now, right? Like,
Absolutely.
you're not called, it's not like, I mean, I'm definitely a faith believer, and it's like God didn't call me to make a certain like particular like revenue goal for the year.
Yeah.
Called me to, bring support and healing to the people that I am interacting with. And so, just being really conscious of like, what are the metrics that you're using to judge yourself? And then are those really truly the right metrics or not? I really feel like the metric that you should be using to measure yourself is, are you living to what you have been called here to do right now? And, it's hard to always understand that, but, just continuing to center back to that conversation to say, you know, am I shining my light the way that I have been called to do? And if you are, then you just got to keep walking.
I swear it's like you've spoken to everyone listening or watching to this right now, to my inner child, and just to know that I should carry that light and shine more of me to whatever I'm putting in myself into and whatever I'm going to do in the future. So thank you so much for that. And lastly, Brianna, it's a question I've got for you about books. So what would you say are the top 2 books that completely changed your life?
Well, one I've already talked about,
The
right? The
Go-Giver.
Go-Giver.
Okay. So that's
That
one.
one is definitely on my top of list. I don't know how many other people I've gifted that to over the years. And then the other that I think about frequently and have gifted many times is The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. So that one's all about how we limit ourselves, Huge fan of that one as well.
And I started the podcast episode with you talking directly with the person listening. So I want to end it in the same way. Brianna, if you can talk to the person right now, listening right now, what would be your end message to them?
My end message to them would be create some rhythms that allow for you to be introspective with yourself, to really get in tune to your emotions, because your emotions are the cue for where you need to lean in with that curiosity, where you might need to kind of course correct, to get into a better space where you feel that level of autonomy, confidence, connectedness that we talked about. But that's a muscle that you have to practice. And you got to find whatever that quiet space is for you. For me, it's journaling. I journal for about an hour every morning. Some people that doesn't work for, right? Other people it's about, going out for a run or, whatever it is. You got to find your space of quiet as a way to really be able to tune into your own personal emotion, because that really unlocks the power for how you can operate into the world.
Thank you so much for being on the SMARTA Podcast.
I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Thank you, Sonia.
I just wanted to say, if you've made it this far into the video without stopping, I wanted to come on here and personally congratulate you for choosing to listen to something that can get you better in a particular area or skill that you might need a little bit of effort working in to get better. And with that being said, if you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel or follow the show on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from, please do so and rate this episode 5 stars, as it is what keeps helping me get better guests on with better nuggets of wisdom that keep inspiring you every time. And I promise you that with each Monday that comes, I'll keep delivering amazing information and knowledge that can help you achieve your better life, that can help you your dream life. With that being said, I'm Sonia. Thank you so much for listening on the SMARTA Podcast. And if nobody told you this today, I want to be the first to tell you that I truly believe in your ability in creating the life of your dreams. Thank you so much. See you next Monday. Bye.